was this something that more caught you off guard, essentially?
Well, my impression, and I'd been on the department for 6 years. I wasn't the newest paramedic. You might say I would have been a seasoned paramedic because I got on in 1990, became a paramedic in 93, and then 96 we took over the ambulance service, and so we had been transporting as an ambulance service for about a year. I think the flood probably caught us off guard. It was new enough for our fire department and the small crew of people that we had at the time just to be an ambulance transport business and a fire department. And so when the flood came, I was off duty that day, and then there was a couple of us that were pretty regularly working a lot of ambulance shifts and fire shifts, and we tried to come in when we knew things were like really unfolding downtown. Roads were getting blocked off, the silt was filling up businesses, and we came in thinking, well, they're going to call us back. And I can remember talking to the captain that was on duty at the time, and he's looking at us like, what are you doing? Nobody's calling 911 right now. And I remember my partner and I kind of looked at each other, we're like, yeah, but I mean, aren't they going to? And we didn't know. And so they said, no, just show up for your regular shift, and if somebody has an emergency, then they'll call 911 and we'll go, and if we need more help, we'll call you back in. And so that very first night when things started going, we weren't on duty, at least I wasn't, and a couple of the other guys weren't, and so we decided to go help as citizens. And so some of the photos that you'll see from back then, you'll see a few of our department personnel in their gear throwing sandbags. And some of them that were wearing their gear, we were throwing sandbags, but we were just off duty. We just wanted to go help. So that night was pretty long, and then a couple of days later, when the department wasn't calling anybody back, myself, a friend of mine that I had at the time, and another firefighter went down to our dispatch center, because Ashland used to have its own dispatch for police and fire, and it was down at the old police station. And they were overwhelmed with phone calls from citizens for like, how do I get water? How do I get rid of my waste? And so we went to dispatch and just volunteered to answer phones from the hundreds and hundreds of calls that we were getting in the city, just to guide citizens to where they needed to go. So.
That first night, what were some of the things that you were tasked with?
Yeah, so we got a call because we weren't necessarily on duty. The fire department said, hey, we're not getting a ton of 911 calls on this. Mostly it was just people wanting to figure out where they should go to be safe. Nobody that was in the path called 911 to have the fire department come out and assist them away from something. But what we did have was a lot of engaged citizens that some of them we knew. Our supervising physician at the time called myself and my regular partner and was like, hey, can you come help sandbag down on Mountain and Hersey Street? There are residences down there that are starting to flood, and if we can sandbag in front of their place. And so that's what we did for most of the night, is went down to that neighborhood through sandbags. We did some up off of Granite Street for a little while, just down into the park area there to try to divert. And so we just made ourselves available to the citizens that were also helping each other out in that event. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's got to be pretty. I mean, just when I think about sandbagging, and the effort that goes into that, that's just got to be painful work at some point.
It was heavy, and in the moment, if you're working with a good group of people, no matter if they're firefighters or not, everybody's got the same mission. And so I think we were all we wanted to do was do the right thing and get help to people that needed it. And so that, I don't know if you'd call that adrenaline or just maybe an overriding sense of purpose and need. And that's what we did. So we did it as long as we could and slept a lot the next day.
When did it really get going, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell not my story, but maybe my wife's story, which is that she was a year out of college and was back home figuring things out. And she and a few friends were at the Rogue Brewery, which is now, I believe, Deep's Restaurant and another bar. And they were actually in the bar at the time that the water was coming over the threshold and down into the bar, and they were just kids. And they were like, is that supposed to happen? And sipping their drinks, and the Rogue Brewery did their best to stay open as long as they could, but then they finally said, okay, you guys gotta get out of here, because the creek was overflowing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think things probably got pretty hectic there right when the creek was starting to overflow the Rogue Brewery. And then not too long after that, I'd say the next morning was when Water Street started to fail. There was some undermining of the foundation of the road there, and then that was when the giant sort of chasm opened up on Water Street. I think some of the things we noted the next day too were the downtown businesses right there on the plaza that were completely filled with silt and rocks and debris. I'll always remember being on, it's the corner of Nutley and Winburn Way, which is right there in the park, and the water had come up. And we were trying to figure out ways to like shore up things so that Pioneer Hall wouldn't get knocked down, and you could feel, and somebody had the name for this, I don't remember what the name is now, I think it's called bouldering, not climbing bouldering, but when large rocks are being pushed by tons of water and they roll and go boom, boom as they move, you could feel the ground shaking. And I know there were a few of us that was like, what is that? Well, those were these giant boulders that were being moved by the force of all that water and just shaking the ground, like better than your Jurassic Park movies that you watch.
Were you ever, did you ever have sort of this cognizant moment where you thought to yourself, like, this is actually like a big deal historically what I'm doing right now? Or were you sort of more caught up in the moment?
I think I was pretty well caught up in the moment. I know my role, I know my duty, and that's what you focus on. I think maybe it's days later, that for me at least, some of the impacts happen because they shut off the water to everywhere in the city, and I lived in the city. And I've always been somebody that doesn't mind roughing it. I grew up in Alaska. And so when they said I needed to go get my shower, my bathroom, and my water up at the old Briscoe School, which was a few blocks from where I was living, I was like, great. And so for the next, I can't remember how many weeks it was until they turned the water back on, because we had to clear the debris around the water treatment plant, which was up in the canyon below Reeder Reservoir. And we weren't sure if it was completely destroyed or not. And it wasn't, but it was covered in a lot of debris. But they kept the water shut off until that could reopen. And I think it was a few weeks. And that's when it kind of sets in, to see your own streets, your own businesses. Munchie's was a restaurant that was the downstairs of where Mix is now, completely filled up. And that was one of our favorite places to go get lunch. And the work to even, not just to work for the city fire department, but then to off duty, go downtown and help remove that debris and remove those rocks and things from that business. Like, that was, cathartic in some ways. We were taking the town back.
Mm-hmm. Were there any memorable calls that you went on during this time? Ones that really stick in your head?
What's really stuck in my head after, 20 plus years is, one, it was that as the fire department, I don't think we were totally prepared for that. We're a small town fire department. We have a very small force. And again, we had just taken over the ambulance service, and that's kind of what we were getting used to. So to handle a flood of this magnitude, I think that weighed pretty heavily, especially on our fire chief at the time, Chief Woodley. And he was instrumental in getting our city organized to try to get resources to come in, water and food and shelter for folks. And then what happened after that too is all of the work that went into figuring out, like, what's going to happen in the next flood? How do we map out where the water's going to go this time and what homes are in danger? And a few of our firefighters with some FEMA money and some other engineers throughout the city, as well as local citizens, got together and really made a robust flood plan for us for the next event. So a lot of amazing work came out from that. And hopefully we're better prepared the next time. For what happened in '97, my memory is that nobody really got hurt, nobody died. The city definitely took a blow, and businesses lost, time and property, and so much damage to things, and yet I don't remember a loss of life from that, and that's a good marker for some things.
For sure. Is this what CERT was born out of?
Yeah, and truly that's what began the CERT program for us. And FEMA had started the program of CERT and was trying to get communities to get interested in it. And really, what the watershed moment, pardon the expression, for us was that flood. And boy, the citizens really responded to it. And it's one of the reasons why Ashland's CERT program has been so good. And we're kind of the fair-haired child for a lot of the nation for a CERT program these days, because what we've done here is just better than most.
Were there any moments where you felt in danger? I know you said nobody died or anything like that, but were there any moments when you're sandbagging or going on calls where you personally felt like, oh, this...
No, I mean, I did have some of the brashness of youth maybe on my side. I do have two moments. One that I've already mentioned, the boulders that were rolling and then feeling the ground shake. And then when the debris had been mostly cleared from downtown, that following week, Chief Don Paul, who's our assistant chief, tasked a few of the firefighters to go downtown with business owners and return to their plaza buildings to pay attention to when the business owners were in there in case the walls were going to collapse on them, because business owners wanted to get back and get their stuff. And I can remember Chief Paul taking me into probably the old Gateway office, which is a sheer sand and mortar brick wall on pretty much all sides, but the left side especially took the brunt of the flood. And I didn't notice it at first until he pointed it out, but the wall was actually bulging inward. And engineers had come and taken a look at it, and they were like, yeah, you know, that one's not great, so let's make sure we got somebody watching in there. And me, just a young kid with all my hair color, Chief Paul sets me up, and there's business owners, and I'm like, okay, Kelly, you're gonna watch the business owners, and you're gonna make sure that if that wall starts to fall, you get them out. And I can just remember thinking, wait a second. But we did, the wall didn't fall, but I did have a moment of like, I don't know that I'm prepared to do this. I'm not sure I could. But that's the best that we could do, so that's what we did.
Yeah. You know, and this is completely different, but just with experiencing Alameda recently,
Oh, yeah.
a little more than a year ago, I mean, were there any comparisons there in terms of the urgency? I know it's fire and water, so completely different things, but
Yeah.
just in terms of like the overall scope of disaster, I mean, can you draw any comparisons between those?
Well, I was directly involved in the Alameda event, and I was one of the first people there, and trying to get our resources in the right place and right time. The comparison is hard. I mean, both events were big, and the Alameda far outweighs the impact, I think, even on the responders, for what we tried to do to stop the Alameda event, and the little victories we had of like saving at least the Quiet Village neighborhood in Ashland, which honestly during the initial hour of the firefight, I thought we were going to lose it. But our people were able to get to the fires just as they were starting, just in time. With the flood in '97, floods are slow. You know, and people have a little more time to get out of their way, and fires are very fast, pushed by wind, as the Alameda event was and stuff too. So the urgency in Alameda was much greater. But the flood, for even our young fire department at the time and inexperienced fire department at the time, there was time to think about, well, what is it that we do need to do, you know? And that's probably why the guys that were in charge at the time were just like, hey, we're not getting a ton of 911 calls on this, you know, go help somebody else. And then that's why we went out and helped with citizens. Very different from the Alameda event. Yeah.
Something that I've noticed, just in, being in a family now of a
Yes.
retired firefighter and everything, but just like one of the kind of defining characteristics that makes up so many of them is just the idea of preparedness, the idea of that whole like have a plan ready and everything.
Yeah.
Do you think that the city is in a better place from a planning perspective now?
Yeah,
Because of that flood?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where a lot of the work and the FEMA grants came from, and it started the CERT program. It also gave us an idea of like what happens the next time a flood comes, like how far will the water spread, and they've calculated everything out. So we do have a better plan for that. Like there's even a plan if the flood happens again, and it'll probably do some of the same things. We know it's going to go right through the middle of town. So what happens if the town is split? How do you get supplies to both sides of the town? And so we've made plans for that. And that said, you can plan for everything, and sometimes those plans don't hold water for you. Pardon the expression. So yeah, there are good plans for it. There's, a lot of good work came out of that incident. And I honestly, like working still here in Ashland, as many years as I have, I just know that we as a department and the local citizenry here are much more prepared. And, hopefully, there's an old saying that I remember from Officer Academy of you always get the test before the lesson. And then hopefully you do well, even without the lesson on this. And I think we've had a few lessons that we've learned from, and so hopefully next time it will be different.
Take me through the cleanup effort, just in terms of what that was like being involved in that. You mentioned a little bit about having to sort of, for lack of a better word, babysit business owners and everything like that. But just take me through just kind of the overall. Yeah,
I mean, I was out of the overall organization of it because I was just strong and could do lots of other things on my days off. So I would be helping neighbors and things like that. But it wasn't through the fire department. I mean, people knew I worked for the fire department, but I wasn't on duty. I was just doing what I think anybody should do, which is help somebody who needs help. I do remember like a couple of days that I was on duty with one of our guys who's since moved on to other things, where with no 911 calls coming in and business owners just grieving what happened to their business, we self-assigned ourselves to go down to Munchie's restaurant and start helping them dig things out. We did get a talking to by the captain that was on duty a little bit later because he didn't assign us to do that. We just did that out of the kindness of our hearts, and it was really good, hard work. But that's not necessarily what the fire department was supposed to be doing at the time. Mm-hmm. It wasn't our assignment.
And how long did it take for things to get back to normal?
Yeah, honestly, I don't necessarily remember. I think it was a few weeks until they turned the water back on, and I mean, that could be wrong. It was some time ago. And then it felt like months before they finally filled in Water Street, before you started seeing the businesses reopen. And I mean, of course, the flood wasn't just Ashland. You could drive down the freeway and see how the flood redrew the map of Bear Creek between Talent and Phoenix and Medford. There's just the river had gone one way, and now it had taken over different spots as well too. And I don't have a ton of information about like the recovery efforts that were done there for Talent and Phoenix and stuff too, but I do know, just knowing this valley and driving I-5 and staring in awe at like, wow, the river is in a completely different place now.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, you got to tell me about this swan or goose or whatever it was.
Yeah, so the swans in the Ashland Pond, are kind of a legendary thing, especially from, going all the way back to the 70s, I want to say. And in the recovery effort with all the big tractors and earth movers and stuff that came to get some of the silt out of there, tragically, one of the tractor drivers didn't notice, but he ran over one of the swans that was there. And they're part of the Ashland's, charm is to have these swans on the pond in Lithia Park. And so there's a lot of grieving and sorrow for the swan. The tractor driver did not feel very good. And then the swan itself seemed to be like depressed and sad. And so there was an effort to get another swan to be its partner to see if it could end its grieving and repartner. And so they got the breed of the swan. I think our forensics lab here in town figured out exactly what a mate would be like and where you could get one. I don't know. But they got one, and they brought one in, and sure enough, the two swans got along like peas in a pod. They were moving their necks back and forth and stuff too, and it was love at first sight. And so that was kind of a symbolic thing that the town's coming back. Hey, we got swans. And it wasn't until a couple of years later, and some of the recovery efforts were still going on downtown. There's still some cleanup going on, where like a real ornithologist, somebody who knows birds, was here and was watching the swans and hearing some of the stories. And I'm not sure who was present for this conversation, but at some point the guy's looking at the swans and he looks at the people that are telling him about it and he says, you know, those are two males, right? And then everybody had just a good chuckle about that. It's like, well, they're in love. Okay.